So hi, hopefully everyone hears me fine as well. That's always the trick with these is knowing if you're actually being heard or not. Um, I see a high back, so that's good. So for those who don't know who I am, what I've done, um, I've been a trans activist for like a long time, 23 years. I started the Transgender Community Forum on America Online back in 1993. Um, then a few years after that, due to some of the stuff that was going on, there was murder of a trans woman by the name of Rita Hester in 1998. And uh, while I was in the Transgender Community Forum's chat area, was discussing this murder and how similar it was to the Chanel Pickett murder that had happened in 1995. That I, was saying, hey, these are both people of color. They're both in Massachusetts. They both had gone to a trans bar, and they've both shown up dead. What's the, you know, why is this a continuing thing? I was talking to people who were actually in the trans community in Boston at the time, and they said, "Well, who's Chanel Pickett? I've never heard of this other case." Um, this led me to start work on the project because I was seeing that we as a community didn't know that we were being killed, didn't have any idea of how widespread a problem was, and neither did I at that point. Um, this was all very much, I grew along with the project. That started initially as a web project, Remembering Our Dead, which now I'm going to try to see if I can screen share this. So bear with me as I learn. Now, that's the original Remembering Our Dead website. Well, it's a little bit more in the original because originally there were only 30 names on it. It actually scrolls down quite a ways, which I'll talk about that in a minute as well. The project started here as a way to show people via the web just how big the problem was. Eventually, it had its limitations, and we wanted to raise awareness outside of the web space, and we took it into First Life to create what we called the Day of Remembrance. We started in San Francisco initially as a awareness event around a showing of the film The Brandon Teena Story. We felt that went very well. We did it the next November, both in San Francisco and in Massachusetts. And since then, it's grown. It's become an international event. It's organized primarily via the web. And I mean, that's where it is today. It's become something much larger than we ever expected. So that's kind of my introduction on that. And I still do work with Day of Remembrance. I still do other trans work. I am the managing editor for genderfork.com as well. And that's my story. A couple places. This is Courtney's question. How has it traveled the world? And is it honored differently? And it is. Initially, it some of the first places that picked it up were transgender support groups would have a part of their meeting where they'd have a very brief memorial or set up candles in their meeting area, and it was all very kind of quiet and very insular. Some places did take it, were more out and visible, did marches or speaking events at the LGBT centers or this sort of thing. Where it really started to pick up was when it started to get to college campuses, and you started to see beyond just speaking events, you saw, where they do chalk outlines, or they do gravestones with the names on it and present those throughout the day. And it really started to build a larger awareness. Outside of the US as well, once it started to really go international, it's very different, because across the world, there's very different realities as far as, we were talking there earlier, Brazil, where trans murder happens at a far greater rate than the US, far greater rate than probably anywhere. It's a much bigger issue. In Turkey as well, a couple of years ago, they've had, as we know, issues there recently. They can get into, they can be arrested for doing a TDOR, and they still push that out. So it's a very different reality to deal with than what we deal with here in the US, where it's frankly a lot safer to do it. So I think that that's part of how it's honored differently, is that it's a greater urgency in some other places. The one thing that when I started the project, I wanted to, admit a certain amount of naivete that we would, get this event going. We'd start raising the awareness. We'd start building that, and the number of deaths would go down. And that's not what's happened. We've actually seen the deaths stay pretty steady over the last 15 years. And it's really, it's distressing to look at that. Looking at, you want it to go down, you don't want it to go up. Now, part of it is that we've got better awareness, and we're seeing more of these cases being tracked down and publicized. A lot of the cases that have happened in the last few years, when we started the project, you wouldn't have seen media coverage on. The media wouldn't have felt that it was necessary for their news agency, or I had one of the locals, there was a death of a Hispanic woman in Oakland a few years back, and the reporter reached out to me and said, "Look, they don't want me to cover this on the news, because they're looking at it as just a sex worker, and we don't talk about sex worker murders, and we don't talk about this." But I felt it was important, and so we're really seeing that sort of thing grow, where we're seeing people actually listening and understanding and getting that word out. So I think that's important as part of growing, not so much the event, but the awareness around trans murders themselves. I think that's, I absolutely want to see a move towards a reduction. That's where it needs to go, and I hope that it gets there. Let's see, Stacy has a question. The most effective formats are the ones that get noticed. You can do pretty much anything. The key is getting people to watch it, to pay attention to it. It's important to contact the media and get the word to them and get them involved in whatever you're planning. I personally think that, I'm also very much a proponent of candlelight vigils and marches. But really, getting the word out, just getting the word out, I think is the key. Any moments I'd like to share where I've helped change the hearts and minds of cisgendered people? Goodness. I'm trying to think. It's kind of a blur. There's been a lot of them. There's one that's very personal to me that I don't think I've ever actually shared. I don't think I've ever talked about this. I was actually on Bay Area Rapid Transit, BART, on my way to Gwen Araujo's open casket viewing. And was there with a trans friend of mine that had flown in out of Texas, and also my wife. And there were a couple of other people on the train. And we got to talking with them, and very much a one-on-one discussion, and saying, well, this is where we're going, and getting to know them. As it turned out, one of the two people was actually part of the Contra Costa Times newspaper family as a reporter. I did not know that at the time. Might have said a few different things. But really getting to know them, talking with them one-on-one, and discussing what little we knew of the case at the time, and also our lives and the amount of death that happens that we face. And seeing these two people who were white middle class, folks, really understand us one-on-one, and see their minds change on what trans is and what we were facing. I was really also worried, Rafa, I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, with the recent Olympics. There was a lot of murders early in the year that I felt were what I've seen happen in some other cases, where you have a large international event come in, and in the months leading up to that large event, you see a spike in trans murders that in some parts of the world are being coordinated in some ways by the local police force or other government officials to clean up the undesirables in the area. So that's something that I worried about with the Rio Olympics coming up. But Rio Olympics or not, it's just staggering. So the violence. And I agree, Stacy. We often, not necessarily TDOR, but when we start talking about trans violence, it often gets focused as a U.S. thing. You'll see, it's understandable to some extent, but you'll see the news reports go, well, this is the 18th death this year, or this is the 19th death this year. And that's not entirely true. It's the 18th that we know of in the United States. There are hundreds that happen each year. You'll have practically, hundreds just from Brazil. You'll have, Middle East. You'll have Eastern European, where you'll see just a huge amount of anti-transgender violence and death. But we often lose track of that. We think, well, we had 18 this year, we had 19, 20, whatever. And it's not the whole story. Aside from the fact that, you also have, like I said, that are reported. We still don't see every case reported, and we don't see them all reported accurately. We'll see people being dead named, put into their birth genders. We'll still see, not like we used to, but we'll still see cases of man dressed in women's clothing, or one that I actually haven't seen for many years now, but this was one that I started to have to use as a search string back in the late 90s, early 2000s to find cases, was bearded woman, which is such an offensive term. in order to find FTM cases, because they weren't reporting them as trans cases, not at all. They would use that term. There's a few things we're working on with that. We actually started some a couple years ago. TDOR is put together by a staff of 3 people, at least as far as at the, putting out word about where TDOR events are going on, maintaining the web presence, this sort of thing. We're looking to get in more people and grow that. We're looking at getting the original Day of Remembrance page updated and put into some sort of format where it could be much more easily updated. It was created in the 90s, and there is no database back on it. And it was just, hard coding the pages and sticking them in, of all things, a tabled format. Gasp. So we're looking at working on that. We're looking at ways that we can continue to look to the future and make it more visible and make the issue more visible.